The heavy suitcase hit the mattress with a thud that rattled the bed frame. Candace did not look back. She strode toward the desk, snatched a thick manila folder, and launched it across the room. It struck the wall behind Carmen, sliding down to rest against the baseboard. Carmen snatches the file. The air in the bedroom grew thin. Candace moved with a predatory stillness, closing the gap until she stood inches from her sister. She did not raise her voice. The threat was sharper when kept low. "You are going to the office tomorrow," Candace said, her eyes fixed on the folder. "You are taking my place at the firm for the entire week." Carmen stood by the window, her back rigid. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the city outside. She looked at the folder, then at the woman standing between her and the door. The trap was set. Candace leaned in, her presence dominating the small space, and waited for the inevitable surrender. She knew exactly which lever to pull to ensure compliance. The room felt like a cage, and the lock had just clicked shut. Candace stepped closer, her gaze tracking the pulse at Carmen's throat. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small, worn photograph and held it up between them. "If you refuse," she whispered, "everyone learns exactly what you did last winter. The firm, the board, the police, they would all love to see this." Carmen felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands balled into fists, the knuckles turning white as she fought the urge to lunge. She gritted her teeth until her jaw ached, but Candace blocked the path with a smirk. The secret was a blade pressed against her windpipe. Carmen tried to form a protest, but the sound died in her throat, choked off by the sheer weight of the impending exposure. She looked down at the floor, the wood grain blurring through her vision. She nodded once. The movement was stiff, mechanical, and heavy with resentment. Candace tucked the photograph away, satisfied, and turned toward the door. The trap was not just set, it was locked tight. Carmen stood alone in the center of the room, her hands still shaking with a rage she could not yet release. She gripped the leather briefcase handle until her fingers cramped, the weight of the document folder pressing against her side. Every sound in the vast atrium, the clicking of heels, the distant ring of phones felt like an accusation. She approached the security desk, her pulse thudding against her ribs. She fumbled with the badge, her thumb sliding twice before the scanner finally chirped green. The elevator ride up was a slow, agonizing ascent into a life she did not want. When the doors slid open, the office stretched out before her, a grid of glass and steel, humming with the frantic energy of a high-stakes firm. She navigated the maze of cubicles, keeping her gaze low, trying to project a confidence she was far from feeling. She found the desk, an island of organized chaos in the center of the floor. She sat down, cleared a space among the scattered files, and tried to breathe. She was an intruder in her own skin, playing a part that could end her at any moment. She reached for the phone, her hand hovering over the receiver, waiting for the first test of her performance. From the elevated glass box of his office, Oliver watched the floor. He leaned back, his gaze narrowing as he tracked the woman at the central desk. For weeks, that space had been a whirlwind of missed deadlines and scattered papers, a constant source of friction. Today, it was silent. He watched her hands move over the keyboard, steady, deliberate, devoid of the frantic energy he had grown to expect. She didn't look up. She didn't spin in her chair to gossip with the analysts. She simply worked, the rhythmic sound sharp in the quiet of his room. He frowned. The contrast was jarring. It wasn't just efficiency, it was a total change in temperament. He stood, walked to the glass partition, and leaned his shoulder against the frame, watching her organize a stack of files with surgical precision. The woman he thought he knew was gone, replaced by someone who didn't stumble. He turned his head and signaled to Marcus, who was standing by the printer. When the man approached, Oliver gestured toward the desk below. "Follow her," he said, his voice low and tight. "Something is wrong. She is not who she was yesterday." Oliver could not look away. He left his office, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, and walked toward the center of the floor. Every step was a calculation. Carmen did not notice him until he was 3 feet away. She looked up, her expression calm, devoid of the usual defensive flair he expected from her. She held a complex project report in her hands, her fingers tracing a line of data without the slightest tremor. She did not stutter. She did not offer a frantic excuse. She simply handed him the file. Oliver took it, the paper crisp against his palm. He looked from the document to her face, searching for a twitch, a flicker of panic. Anything to bridge the gap between the woman he loved and the stranger before him. She looked back with a cool, detached intensity that sent a chill through him. There was no chaos here, only a terrifying surgical focus. He turned and walked back toward the private office, his pulse racing. The woman in his chair was gone, replaced by a ghost that looked exactly like her. He reached his desk. Oliver did not wait for the doubt to settle. He pressed the intercom button, his thumb white with pressure. "Marcus, my office, now." The command echoed through the speaker, crisp and devoid of warmth. When the door opened, Oliver did not look up from the screen. He kept his eyes fixed on the live feed of the office floor, watching Carmen move with that same unsettling efficiency. Marcus stepped inside, closing the heavy door with a quiet click. Oliver stood, walked to the window, and pointed a finger at the woman below. "That is not her," Oliver said, his voice dropping to a low, jagged edge. "I want to know where she goes when the lights go out. I want to know who she talks to, what she hides, and why she has stopped making mistakes." Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, his gaze shifting toward the floor. Oliver turned, his face hard. "Do not lose her. If she leaves this building, you are behind her. If she takes a breath, you count it. I want a full report on my desk by dawn." Marcus nodded once and pivoted toward the exit. The air in the office felt thinner, charged with the weight of the order. As Marcus moved toward the elevators, he kept his eyes locked on the target. The transition from professional colleague to silent shadow complete. Marcus slipped out of the lobby doors just as the streetlights hummed to life. The city was a maze of gray concrete and rushing traffic, but he kept his eyes fixed on the figure moving through the crowd. Carmen walked with purpose, ignoring the neon glare reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement. She turned left into a narrow alleyway, and Marcus pulled his collar up, ducking behind a parked delivery truck. He waited, his breath hitching in the cold air. She emerged on the other side, crossed the street, and darted into a crowded subway entrance. Marcus adjusted his pace, keeping 3 people between them to stay invisible. He pulled out a small notebook, jotting down the time and the exact location of her entry. She did not look back. She did not hesitate. Every turn she took seemed calculated to lose a tail, but Marcus was relentless. He watched her board the train just as the doors hissed shut. He stayed on the platform, his fingers tracing the edge of his phone as he sent a quick update to the office. She was leading him deeper into the city, unaware that every movement was being logged. The hunt was no longer a suspicion. It was a confirmed, systematic pursuit. Marcus watched from the edge of the park as the woman entered a small, dimly lit apartment block. He waited until the lights flickered on in a third-floor unit before moving toward the side entrance. The lock was simple, a rusted latch that gave way under his touch. He climbed the stairs, his boots silent on the wooden steps. He reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped into the small living space. It was sparse, but a desk in the corner held a collection of papers. He shuffled through them, his eyes widening as he pulled out a faded birth certificate. The names were identical, the dates matched, and the photograph clipped to the corner showed 2 girls standing side by side. He did not need to search further. The secret was not a mystery of identity, but a matter of blood. He tucked the paper into his pocket, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He turned and left the apartment, descending the stairs and stepping back into the night. His pace quickened as he headed back to the firm. He had the answer, and the silence of the city felt heavy with the impending storm. He reached the glass doors of the office, his resolve hardened by the proof burning in his pocket. Marcus stood in the center of the executive office, pulling the document from his pocket. He laid it flat on the mahogany surface. Oliver looked down, his eyes scanning the lines of text once, then twice. The silence in the room stretched thin, brittle as glass. Oliver did not speak, but the pen in his hand snapped. Ink pooled onto the desk, black and viscous. He pushed his chair back, the metal legs screeching against the polished floor. He stood, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. He did not look at Marcus. His gaze was fixed on the open-plan office beyond the glass wall. Every employee stopped. Keyboards went silent. Phones ceased ringing. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the sudden, violent shift in the CEO's demeanor. He walked to the door, his movements stiff and predatory. He did not care about the reports, the pending meetings, or the staff watching him. His focus was singular. He pushed the heavy glass doors open, the momentum carrying him into the main workspace. The staff retreated, desks becoming islands of safety as he moved toward the center of the room. It was a storm moving through a quiet field, and everyone in his path braced for the impact. Oliver did not slow his pace until he was inches from her. Carmen retreated, but her back hit the partition before she could find an exit. He reached out, his fingers locking onto her arm with enough force to make her gasp. With a sharp, sudden motion, he shoved her backward. Carmen tried to twist away, but he pinned her in place. His forearm pressed firmly against her collarbone to restrict her movement. The office staff huddled in their chairs, heads ducked, eyes wide. None dared to breathe. Oliver leaned in, his face mere centimeters from hers, his voice a low, gravel-filled growl that cut through the silence. "Who the hell are you?" he roared, the question vibrating in the small space between them. Carmen struggled for breath, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a plea. He shook her, his grip tightening until the skin turned pale. He was not asking for a name. He was demanding a confession for a deception he could not yet name. Oliver tightened his hold, his knuckles turning white against her arm. Carmen stood pinned, the cold glass biting into her spine. The silence in the office was absolute, a heavy blanket that muffled even the sound of his ragged breathing. No one moved. No one dared to look away, yet no one wanted to witness what was unfolding. Then, a sharp, electric pop resonated from the wall above the cubicles. The wall-mounted television flickered to life. Static hissed through the room, a jagged, unnatural sound that sliced through the tension. The blue light of the screen washed over the desks, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. Oliver's head snapped toward the noise, his grip on Carmen slackening for a fraction of a second. A news banner flashed in bright, urgent red at the bottom of the screen. The anchor's voice cut through the static, crisp and devoid of empathy, announcing a breaking report of a catastrophic plane crash. The personal stakes of the room vanished, replaced by the hollow, cold weight of a public disaster. Carmen watched his eyes widen as he stared at the screen. His focus ripped away from her as the reality of the broadcast began to sink into the room. The news anchor spoke of debris and lack of survivors. Names began to scroll across the bottom of the screen in a stark, white font. Oliver stood frozen, his hand still hooked into the fabric of Carmen's shoulder, but his attention was entirely consumed by the broadcast. He leaned forward, squinting as if the light from the screen were blinding him. Then, the name appeared, Candace, listed among the missing. The air in the office seemed to thin. Oliver let out a sound that was less a breath and more a jagged tear in the silence. His knees hit the carpeted floor with a heavy, final thud. He did not look at the victims anymore. He looked at the floor, his shoulders shaking with the force of his sudden, violent grief. Carmen watched him, her own heart hammering against her ribs, but he did not notice her presence. He gripped his own hair, his knuckles raw, his breathing turning into sharp, wet gasps. When he finally looked up, the sorrow had evaporated. His eyes were hard, fixed on Carmen with a sudden, sharp intensity that made her recoil. He was no longer a man mourning. He was a man arming himself with his own pain, searching for someone to blame for the void left behind. Oliver surged upward, his movements sudden and uncoordinated. He ignored the scattered papers around him, his focus narrowing until the entire room seemed to vanish, leaving only Carmen in his line of sight. He closed the distance in 2 strides, his fingers digging into her arms with enough force to leave bruises. "You!" he roared, the sound echoing off the high ceilings and causing the staff to scramble toward the exits. He shoved her backward until her head struck the glass wall with a dull, hollow thud. Carmen gasped, trying to pull away, but he pinned her in place with his forearm against her chest. He did not listen to her shallow, frantic breaths or her attempts to speak. To him, the switch was the cause of the disaster, a logic that had solidified in his mind like stone. He pressed harder, his weight shifting to trap her against the cold surface. The office was a tomb of silence now, save for his jagged, uneven shouting. his expression devoid of anything but a desperate, crushing need to punish her for a tragedy he could not control. Oliver did not release his grip. He hauled Carmen away from the glass wall, her heels skidding across the office floor, leaving faint white scuffs on the wood. She clawed at his forearm, trying to pry his fingers loose, but his hold remained iron tight. He dragged her through the reception area, past the empty desks and flickering monitors, toward the service elevator. Carmen lunged for the doorframe, hooking her fingers into the metal trim, anchoring herself with every ounce of remaining strength. Oliver stopped, his chest heaving, and delivered a sharp, decisive shove that broke her grip. She stumbled, fell, and was immediately hauled back up by her hair. He threw her into the back seat of his car, the leather cold against her skin as she tried to scramble toward the opposite door. He slammed the vehicle shut, the sound echoing in the parking garage, and locked the mechanisms with a sharp click. He slid into the driver's side, his hands white on the steering wheel, leaving the city behind and driving toward his mansion with a frantic, unwavering speed. The car skidded to a halt on the gravel driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled. Oliver yanked the door open and grabbed Carmen by the arm, dragging her across the stone walkway toward the side entrance. He did not speak. His grip remained punishing, guiding her through the darkened hallways of the mansion and down a flight of narrow, wooden stairs. The air grew colder, smelling of dust and stagnant moisture. Carmen stumbled, her feet catching on the uneven floorboards, but he hauled her upward before she could hit the ground. He shoved her forward into the dim, windowless space at the base of the foundation. She lunged toward the stairs, desperate to reach the threshold, but he caught her shoulder and threw her backward into the center of the room. She hit the concrete floor hard, her palms scraping against the grit. Oliver stood in the doorway for a heartbeat, his shadow stretching long across the floor, his face unreadable in the low light. He stepped out and pulled the heavy door shut. The wood groaned on its hinges, sealing the frame with a final, echoing thud. A metallic click followed as the bolt slid into place. Total, the basement became a world of gray textures and frozen time. Without a window, the concept of day vanished, replaced by the rhythmic clicking of the lock when food was pushed through the gap in the door. Carmen began to track the passage of time by dragging her fingernail against the rough concrete wall, carving thin, vertical lines. She reached 30, then 50, but eventually, the lines blurred into a jagged, meaningless mess. She stopped counting. The cold air seeped through the floorboards, turning her breath into faint, heavy footsteps that paced the floor directly above her. Those footsteps were her only connection to the world outside, a reminder that she was not alone even if she remained unseen. Her muscles grew stiff from the lack of movement, and the dampness of the foundation settled into her bones. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip of moisture from a pipe in the corner. She lost the ability to distinguish between morning and night, drifting in and out of a restless, shallow sleep that offered no real rest. Every hour felt like a heavy weight, pressing down on the foundation of her resolve as the seasons changed unseen beyond the thick, locked door, and the chain rattled against the bed frame, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the basement air. She tried to pull her leg toward the center of the room, but the resistance was immediate and absolute. The steel link bit into her skin, leaving a raw, inflamed circle where the metal had chafed for months. She leaned back against the cold wall, flickering bulb that hung from the ceiling. She stared at her own hands, noticing how the knuckles stood out against pale, translucent skin. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and painful. Every shift in position sent a jolt of stiffness through her spine. She reached out to touch the floor, her fingers brushing the dust that had settled in deep, gray drifts. There was no strength left to fight the constraints. She closed her eyes, the silence of the basement pressing against her ears until it felt physical, like a weight resting on her chest. Her body was failing. She simply existed, a shadow in the dark, waiting for a change that never seemed to arrive. The stillness of the basement was interrupted by a sensation that had nothing to do with the cold or the chains. It began as a soft, rhythmic ripple deep within her abdomen, barely perceptible against the background ache of her body. Carmen froze, her hand instinctively pressing against the curve of her torso. She waited, breath held, wondering if the hunger or the long confinement had finally begun to play tricks on her nerves. Then, it happened again, a distinct, the static fog in her mind clearing in an instant. This was not a symptom of her captivity. It was a heartbeat, separate from her own, growing in the dark. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, grounding her to the present moment. She shifted her position, ignoring the bite of the shackle, and wrapped her arms around herself, creating a shield with her own body. The despair that had defined her existence for months receded, replaced by a sharp, cold clarity. She was no longer just a prisoner waiting for the end. She was a vessel, and the survival of what lived inside her became the only objective that mattered. Her fingers tightened against her skin, and for the first time since the lights went out, she looked toward the basement door with a steady, unyielding gaze. Carmen kept her palm pressed flat against her stomach, the warmth of her own skin the only comfort in the damp room. She traced the faint outline of her growing abdomen, a secret she guarded with every breath. The child was a tether to a future she had almost abandoned. She looked at the heavy iron chain, then back to her midsection, the weight of the realization sinking in. The man who kept her locked in this darkness was the architect of the life she now protected. This irony felt like a blade, sharp and unavoidable. She heard the distinct, rhythmic click of heavy boots on the stairs. The sound vibrated through the floorboards, rhythmic and authoritative. She immediately pulled her legs inward, hunching her shoulders to obscure the swell of her belly beneath her frame. She shifted to face the corner, turning her back to the stairs, and gripped the edge of the bed frame until her knuckles turned white. Every time the door creaked, she braced for his arrival, the conflict of her situation tightening in her throat. She was a mother-in-waiting, bound to her enemy by the blood of their son. She closed her eyes, forcing her breathing to even out, and prepared to face the man who would never know the truth of what he had created. Marcus sat in the dim light of the office, the glow of his monitor casting sharp shadows across his face. He had reviewed the crash report a dozen times, but something continued to pull at his focus. He scrolled past the wreckage photos and returned to the passenger manifest. His cursor hovered over the entry for the private flight. He tapped a key, magnifying the timestamp of the boarding gate clearance. It was 3 minutes after the plane had already taxied onto the runway. He leaned back, his chair creaking in the silence of the empty floor. That was impossible. He pulled a physical folder from his desk drawer and cross-referenced the log with the airport surveillance logs he had secured weeks ago. The log showed an empty seat in the manifest, yet the weight and balance report for the flight listed a full cabin. He stood up, pacing the small perimeter of his cubicle. The math did not reconcile. He looked at the photo of the crash site once more, then at the name on the manifest. A cold realization began to form. He grabbed his coat and moved toward the exit, his mind racing through the implications of a staged flight. The official narrative was crumbling, and he knew he had to find the source of the discrepancy before anyone else realized the truth. Marcus drove until the city lights faded into the industrial sprawl of the private airfield. He bypassed the main gate, moving through the shadows of the loading docks until he reached the hangar linked to the flight manifest. The air smelled of jet fuel and stagnant rain. He broke the seal on the side door and slipped inside. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, illuminating rows of idle machinery. He moved to the administrative office at the back, his boots crunching on broken glass. He forced the locked filing cabinet open with a pry bar. Inside, a hidden ledger lay beneath a stack of invoices. He flipped the pages until he saw the entry. It was a secondary log, handwritten and dated the morning of the crash. It detailed a passenger transfer to a different aircraft, one that had departed for an unlisted destination hours before the official flight. Beside the entry was a signature. He recognized the loop of the letters instantly. It was Candace. The proof was undeniable. She had never been on that doomed plane. Marcus stood in the silence of the hangar, the paper trembling in his grip. He had the evidence that would shatter the foundation of Oliver's world. He turned and sprinted toward his car, the weight of the truth driving him forward. Marcus stood under the flickering fluorescent light, the ledger open on the cold metal desk. His eyes traced the ink again. It was not just Candace. Below her signature, a second name appeared in the same bold, familiar script, Otis. He stared at the name, the air in the hangar suddenly feeling thin. Oliver's brother, the man who had been absent from the firm for months. The connection snapped into place with terrifying clarity. This was not a random disappearance. It was a calculated departure, They had planned this together, leaving a trail of wreckage and false reports to cover their tracks. Marcus felt the heat of anger rise in his chest. He thought of the basement. He thought of the weeks he had spent watching Oliver descend into a spiral of obsession and cruelty, believing he was avenging a ghost. Every action Oliver took, every brutal decision he made against Carmen, was built on a foundation of pure, manufactured lies. The weight of the injustice was suffocating. He tucked the ledger into his jacket, his movements sharp and precise. He had to reach the mansion. Every second that ticked by was another moment of agony for the woman trapped in the dark, suffering for a sin she never committed. He slammed the office door shut and ran. Marcus burst into the study, the heavy oak doors slamming against the walls. Oliver sat behind his desk. He strode forward and slammed the ledger onto the mahogany surface, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Oliver stiffened. "Explain this," Marcus commanded. Oliver pushed the book away, his jaw tight. "I do not have time for your theatrics." Marcus reached out, grabbed Oliver's wrist and forced his hand back onto the ledger, pressing his thumb against the handwritten names. Candace, Otis. The ink was clear, the handwriting unmistakable. Oliver stared at the signatures, the color draining from his face. His pulse hammered against his neck. He tried to speak, but only a jagged breath escaped him. The ledger slid from his trembling fingers, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. The pages fluttered open, exposing the betrayal in full detail. Oliver stood, his chair skidding backward, his eyes wide and vacant as the reality of his months of cruelty finally shattered his resolve. He had destroyed everything for a ghost. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Oliver's erratic breathing. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at the ledger. He stared at the closed door, the reality of his actions carving a path through his mind. He turned, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He grabbed the heavy brass keys from the desk, his knuckles white. He did not walk. He lunged toward the hallway. His shoes hammered against the marble floor, a rhythmic, desperate sound that echoed through the vast, hollow mansion. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his breath hitching in his chest. Every step felt like a heavy toll for the months he had wasted in a fog of misplaced rage. He reached the lower corridor, the air growing colder, smelling of damp stone and stale dust. He fumbled with the keyring, his fingers trembling so violently that the metal clattered against the lock. He did not stop. He threw his weight against the wall to steady himself, then lunged again, his eyes fixed on the heavy iron door at the end of the hall. He was frantic, his pulse roaring in his ears, fueled by the terrifying, cold realization that he had spent months punishing an innocent woman for a ghost. The key turned with a sharp metallic click that echoed against the damp concrete walls. Oliver shoved the door open, his chest heaving, the light from the hallway spilling into the gloom. He stumbled inside, his eyes darting to the corner where the bed frame stood. Carmen was there, tethered by heavy iron chains that rattled against the floor as she pulled back, pressing her spine into the wall. Her movements were slow, burdened by the weight of her pregnancy. He stopped dead. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the scent of stagnant dust and her fear. He saw the marks on her wrists, the pale, her eyes hollowed out by isolation. He dropped to his knees, his hands reaching for the shackles, but he hesitated, his fingers hovering inches from her skin. He looked at the curve of her stomach, then up at her face, his own features draining of all color. The horror of what he had done was no longer a theory. It was a breathing, fragile reality standing before him in the dark. He fumbled with the mechanism, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Oliver remained on his knees, his hands pressed flat against the cold concrete floor. He did not look up, his forehead resting against the edge of the bed frame. "Carmen, please," he whispered, but he pulled back as if burned. He looked up then, his face glistening with sweat and tears, his eyes darting across her frame as if searching for a way to undo the months of confinement. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. Everything I did, the reports, the anger, it was all based on a lie I believed. You have to understand." He crawled forward an inch, his voice climbing in pitch, cracking under the weight of his own panic. "Stay. Just stay. I can fix this. I can provide everything you need. You are safe here now. I will make up for every second, every day, every moment of this nightmare. Please, look at me." He reached out, his fingers trembling, aiming for her hand. The air between them felt brittle, charged with the weight of his frantic, hollow promises. He waited for a sign, any sign, but she only watched him with a stillness that cut deeper than any scream. Carmen pushed herself up, her hand pressing firmly against her stomach to support the weight of the child. Rusted chains that lay coiled on the floor like dead snakes. She took a step, forcing him to scramble backward to clear her path. "You chained me here for months," she said, her voice steady and devoid of warmth. "You hunted me, starved me, and broke me for a woman who never cared enough to stay." She gestured toward the ceiling, then back at his trembling form. "The irony is absolute." She looked down at him, her eyes hard and unblinking. "You lost the right to know me the moment you locked that door. You will never see me again, and you will never lay eyes on this child." She turned her back on him, her movements precise and final. The power dynamic in the room shifted. The captor remained on his knees, staring at the empty space where she had stood, while she reclaimed the air around her. Carmen stepped past him, her stride even and deliberate. She ignored the way he turned to follow her, his hands clawing at the air as if trying to grasp the shadow she left behind. Her boots hit the concrete stairs, the sound echoing upward into the hollow silence of the house. She climbed, each movement a reclamation of the rhythm she had lost in captivity. Reaching the foyer, she paused. The house was vast, silent, and cold, filled with the remnants of a life she never asked for. She did not look back at the grand staircase or the gilded portraits. She walked to the heavy oak front door and turned the iron latch. It resisted, then clicked open with a sharp, metallic snap. The cold air rushed in, biting and clean, clearing the stale scent of the basement from her senses. She stepped over the threshold, her feet meeting the gravel of the driveway. The wind whipped past her, tugging at her hair, but she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. She did not look back at the mansion. She walked away, her pace steady, moving toward the dark expanse of the road. Behind her, the door swung shut, the sound of the locking mechanism final and absolute. Thousands of voices hummed in the air, a chaotic, joyful symphony that Carmen had spent years cultivating for this moment. She stood near the edge of the paved walkway, her gaze locked on the sea of caps and gowns. There he was, a young man, his posture upright and his face alight with the sharp, focused energy that belonged entirely to his own future. He broke away from a group of classmates, his stride long and purposeful as he scanned the crowd to find her. Carmen felt the familiar, steady rhythm of her own breathing, a stark contrast to the stifling air of a basement long left behind. She pushed a strand of hair back, her hand lingering on the fabric of her sleeve. Then, she saw him, standing near the shadow of a large oak tree. 50 yards away was Oliver. He looked thinner, his shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. He did not move toward her. He simply stood there, a silent observer of a life he had forfeited. His eyes, once burning with frantic intensity, were now dull and fixed on the boy approaching her. He was a relic of a broken era, standing in the bright light of a day he had no part in shaping. The young man reached her, his breath coming in short, excited gasps. He leaned in, embracing her, and the warmth of his presence eclipsed the cold memory of the man beneath the oak tree. Carmen rested a hand on his shoulder, drawing strength from the reality of his growth. She kept her eyes on the boy, but she knew Oliver was still watching. Slowly, she turned her head. The distance between them was no longer a chasm of fear, but a quiet expanse of lost time. Oliver stood motionless, his face etched with the lines of his own choices. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not step forward. He simply waited. Carmen held his gaze for a single heavy heartbeat. The air felt still, the noise of the crowd fading into a dull, distant hum. She gave him a small... They moved forward together, leaving the shadow of the oak tree behind. The past remained where it belonged, rooted in the dirt, while they stepped into the bright, open expanse of the day.